Hello and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Steve Allure and I am the Director of the Americas for Secure Code Warrior. And I'm joined here by Russ Wolf, who is the Dean of Cybersecurity for Capital One. Today's topic is why financial institutions are leading the charge to upskill their developers in secure coding. Russ, welcome to the webinar. Wondering if you could do us all a favor and briefly introduce yourself.
Sure, Steve, appreciate it. Just for a bit of clarification, because Dean of Cybersecurity is probably a interesting sounding title to a lot of people. Capital One has developed an internal tech college where we've kind of spun out technical training into a separate institution within the company. So I actually lead the technical training for both cybersecurity and also for cloud. So that set aside, I have been in the cybersecurity world for about 20 years now. Most recently, I've been to Capital One just a couple years in this role with the technical college. And before that, I led product security and secure development programs at GE. So, and a number of sundry roles before that. So I've been doing this a while, and I'm very happy to be here with you guys.
Excellent. Russ, we appreciate you making the time, and I'm looking forward to the conversation. Before we get started, one of the things that I wanted to ask you, Russ, is from your perspective, and I recognize that some of this you're going to either be able to speak to about your own personal experiences or on behalf of Capital One as a representative in the financial industry. Why are financial institutions investing in secure coding training? So why is your organization investing in it, and why should other industries care as much?
That's a great question, and I think the first response I have to that, Steve, is that any company who's embracing technology and really bringing software into the foundation, kind of a foundational portion of their company, has to embrace secure coding. Capital One specifically, we're moving into a lot of new technologies. We're moving out of our data centers, and we're doing a lot of things where a lot of our enterprise is being defined as code. And when you have so many software engineers building out so much code, you just can't rely on the older processes of build, test, and throw it to the security group. So we really need to get our engineers up to speed on these things.
Excellent. And that actually leads right into where we'll get started. So for today, we'll cover why our smart financial institutions, have changed their approach to software security. Look at some of the common elements of a successful software security program. Talk about the importance of gamification, metrics, assessments, and upskilling their development teams. So really the approach that one takes. Throughout this webinar, but at the end, we'll look specifically at some of the things that Russ and team are doing to lead the way at Capital One, and in the end, look at some key takeaways. There is an opportunity for those of you on the webinar to ask questions, so we ask you to submit those in a chat box, and we will have some time for some Q&A at the end of this session. So let's get started. So Russ, picking up on a theme that you just talked about, and we're not going to go reiterate lots of industry statistics, all which are really good and very powerful, but some of the themes are important to revisit. When we were talking about this episode of I Love Lucy came immediately to mind, and I think it's a really good one when you think about the fact of it's really hard to keep up with AppSec today, and when you consider that backdrop that you just talk about of organizations that are moving, financial institutions moving from bricks and mortars to become a digital organization and have going through digital transformations, the whole DevOps agile movement, all it really means is more and more is becoming software driven versus people or physically related, and things are happening faster and faster every day. So moving from waterfall, which maybe is the equivalent of a manufacturing line here, and in starting to pick up the pace and pick up the pace and pick up the pace, you ultimately, it's not a funny matter, but when you put it in this context, it really is representative of the overwhelming task that many of us have, and something's got to change. One
Yep,
of the
complete.
elements of, go ahead, Russ.
I was just gonna say I completely agree, and I think it's funny. I was just sitting here mulling over how many people on the call actually know who those two ladies were in the last slide, but you can Google Lucy and figure it out. But no, all very true points.
And realize that it was actually aired in black and white.
That was thinking
Uh,
that too, but I was
a good point. So, so one of the other elements here, right, is there's constant pressure to protect against these increasing attacks and vulnerabilities. The reality is whether you look at yourself or your organization, unless you're, a pop-up hut in the middle of in the middle of a mall, or you are a disconnected, street vendor on the corner, everybody's connected somehow with their businesses and are starting to open up, if you will, how customers can access and interact with them as organizations, and as a result are vulnerable to certain, to varying degrees. So the reality is that security teams are not getting any bigger. And even if they could, the expertise continues to remain in short supply. Um, and ultimately, support from development teams is not enough. And I've heard you talk about this before, Russ. It's just not enough to attack the problem. And if the ratio is, one security person to 100 developers, 200 developers, 300 developers, it really doesn't matter. It just makes it, exponentially worse. But the ratios are such that security is part of helping enabling an organization, but can't ultimately be the solution to make this problem less impactful within a company. Would you agree, Russ?
Yeah, I completely agree. And I've watched this challenge be attacked from a lot of different angles over the years where, we were trying to keep up, with the 15, 20,000 software engineers and all the code that they were churning out. And, you not only have to consider what they're building, you have to consider what they've already built and that pile of technical debt behind them. And so often when a security team will come in and start interacting with the development team, and they look at this pile of software that's sitting, already done in production. They find a number of challenges there, and then they turn around and they look at what they're producing, and they find more and more vulnerabilities are being thrown into the mix. Sometimes it's very daunting for engineering teams to even know where to begin. But all these problems are exacerbated by just the increasing speed that we talked about earlier, how software is becoming more and more ubiquitous in every area of business, and becoming so much more important to the overall business mission.
Good point. And when we look at that a little bit differently, right? We talk sometimes here about companies being victims of the security knowledge black hole. And the reality is that your organization, Russ, most organizations are investing significantly in trying to react and detect where these problems exist within application security. Many companies are doing pen testing, variety of different techniques in application scanning to find the issues, right? The security experts within that organization are triaging and prioritizing those issues, for remediation. Ultimately, the developers are required to go fix the problem, which we hope they do. But we're in a break fix mode, so if it's fixed, it's out of sight, out of mind, and that knowledge really disappears into a black hole. Is this a fairly representative scenario that happens within your organization or companies that you work for in the past, Russ?
Definitely, and I think where this really grew from is traditionally way back in days of yore, when the internet was young, et cetera. People would write software and they would think about security while they were writing their software, at least many would, or build systems and they would think about that system's security. But as we grew and became more compartmentalized, and just the whole structure of technology organizations, exploded basically. Things got very, very siloed in roles, and security peeled out and kind of started to become their own team. So then, teams, whether they were actually writing software or even just building out systems, you have the same things happen. So a team would throw together an operating system, put a server, put it out there, and then a security team would come and harden it, right? Or the software engineering team would build out an application. They would send it over to the security group to test it. They'd get it back with a bunch of red marks and instructions on how to fix it. They never really considered the things that they were doing to get the software to the bad place to begin with. They just said, oh, now I got to fix this, and they would fix it dutifully and move on. And the knowledge, if it was even there at all, if it was there, and when it's there, it really disappears in a black hole, because they're just doing rote fixes. Man, basically, sometimes even from some of the static analyzers, you get, this is what you need to cut and paste in here to do the fix, and they really don't understand the root cause of how it occurred to begin with.
Right. It's interesting. I was actually thinking about a presentation I attended where Tahir Al-Gamal, who was one of the early pioneers in helping us, move to the internet and creating some of the first generation, protocols like SSL and that. And he made a statement that was very insightful, which was, we never really designed the internet to do what it's doing today. It wasn't an intentional decision where, when it was established, as it started to expand, that all of those concepts and principles contemplated where we've come to today, which really means that we have to do things differently. And to your point, people become a piece of that solution, right? Where it's not just throwing technology at it; it's really about understanding the people dimension and how that can become part of your ultimate solution. So Russ, can you speak a little bit today, about what you've seen as far as the people challenge when it relates to application security in the development community within the typical organization or those that you've worked for?
Sure. And all these points really are I think, attitudes, and none of this was done in a malevolent way. It was just, these all grew out of that dichotomy that I spoke of earlier, that security was over on one side and the software engineering teams were the other, where software engineering teams, they get paid to produce features and get them out the door quickly. Security was often seen as something that was an impediment to that. So it was always given kind of the second fiddle. You have the idea that security is somebody else's job, right? That I can just do this and the security folks will fix it. There's concerns that that just the whole oversight of security is impeding their application development cycles, and that they don't understand, since nothing has happened up to this point, what's everybody so worried about? And then kind of the worst place you can get to is just treating security as a compliance checkbox, and that can happen on both sides of the equation, right? So the engineering team can treat it that way, and candidly, a lot of I'll say less. What's a kind word I can use? Less informed, I'll say, security organizations, will treat this as a check the box as well, and that really doesn't do much of anything except provide window dressing.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about the fact of, it's kind of ironic, right? And we're slowly learning from our past lessons learned. But if you think about the whole movement to the industrial movement to manufacturing lines and the challenges around how do you perfect that process or improve that process from an efficiency standpoint, from a quality standpoint. That whole quality movement drove and shaped a lot of thinking along the way, recognizing that that was an important aspect to getting it right the first time, because the cost of quality, you get that car off the end of a manufacturing line, to rework that down the road is really, really expensive. It's really no different, right? In the software world, and whether you're in a waterfall methodology or have already made the shift and you're in DevOps and Agile, you have to get it right the first time. And I think one of the things that you've reiterated to me, Russ, is the quality of the software as it relates to the security of that software and the secureness of that software is really needs to become the new standard. And it's almost as if secure quality is the next wave of quality movement that really has to get driven across the industry. and just become a baseline expectation. Because if it does all the magical things that you need it to do functionally, but it can be easily overtaken or exploited, then ultimately it's not achieving the purpose that you need it to achieve.
Yep, that's correct. And I think really, if you think about it from a foundational sense, I mean, security is wrapped up in reliability, right? So, and reliability is obviously a core tenet of quality, and security organizations exist so the owners and stakeholders and investors in a business can have some semblance of reliance that that business is not going to disappear or end up in the headlines and have their stock price sink. So security is very much, part of that whole reliability and resilience equation. And it's been shifted aside for a long time, but I think it's really coming home to roost in a lot of cases, and people are seeing that it's really a core component to their overall business viability.
So when you link these points together, right? One of the things that we've talked about, right, is the net result is you end up in this endless loop of vulnerabilities. What does that look like in your experience, Russ?
So I think I alluded to a little bit that earlier, that you have this technical debt that's built out, but really what's been happening over a lot of years, there's a survey out there, or a document called OWASP Top 10, which is basically a categorization of the most frequent software vulnerabilities that are found in websites, and that are the root causes of many of the things that you see in the headlines today, as far as exploits and organizations that have been hacked. And it's the top 10, and candidly, that top 10 has not changed significantly in the past probably 10 years, if not even longer. Things like SQL injection and cross-site scripting. They'll change places in the top 10 list as far as who's on top, but and maybe one will be added or dropped occasionally, but we're seeing this is kind of like a Groundhog Day, where we're seeing the same things happen over and over again, and a lot of that is due to one, that black hole that we talked about earlier, about knowledge disappearing into, and also just the fact that we haven't really built the concept of security into a software engineer's into their culture and into their skill set. I like to take the analogy of somebody who builds homes, right? If you're a home builder, you don't just go out and go to Home Depot and buy a bunch of stuff and put it in your truck and then throw it together and hope that it's a viable house for somebody to live in. You familiarize yourself with building codes and tolerances and all these things that you need to understand, so you build a structure that's sound and safe and reliable and secure. Then you call in a building inspector maybe to make sure that you didn't miss anything egregious, right? But those that are building the homes, at least in hopefully in most places in the world, understand those codes and build to those codes. And that's the same thing I think we should expect out of our software engineers, that they should know. I mean, so much of secure coding is do it this way, not that way. Both ways will get you to the same end functionally, but one will end up with a vulnerability where the other won't. So taking the time to learn that and making that part of your craft, and being proud of that and being rewarded for that, I think are all things that can help correct this situation.
Yeah, so the misnomer is, right, in this particular context, that as long as I'm not increasing, I'm okay. But the reality is that if you're flatlining and you're seeing a pretty even trend line year over year, what you're really saying is that you continue to make mistakes, and you've adjusted your capacity to fix as much as you're making. And ultimately, that doesn't necessarily get software out the door more quickly, nor does it help in establishing and lowering your cost and increasing your time to market overall. So it's an interesting problem to address. As I don't think there's a couple of views that are never missed. I think in this case, as we've talked through this subject, I kind of sometimes look at common expressions and say that sometimes they get reversed. So many people in the world might know, "Don't lose the forest amongst the trees." But maybe in this context, right, especially when you think about the maturity of application security as one of the newer areas of focus within cybersecurity, and the fact that we've been taking this reactive approach for so long, or to start that, and we might be feel good about the fact that at least it's not getting worse on those trend lines. That maybe we've been focusing on the forest, and ultimately it's the trees that we need to start to pay more attention to, right? So Albert Einstein's quotes used in many cases. I remember when we had our children and struggling to learn how to become a parent and deal with all of the fun realities around it. Um, there was something that I read that talked about, parenting is really teaching your children, and how many of us have been in school or heard our own parents say, if I've told you once, I've told you a million times, do this, why can't you learn that? And it's really the fact of, well, maybe it's not the student, and maybe it's the teacher or the approach that you're using to teach that student that really needs to change. So it's not the forest, it's the trees that you need to focus on. And I think, Russ, that's a piece of kind of where you've shifted your orientation and where your team is investing significantly.
Uh, yep, I think that sums it up pretty well. We're not letting down our guard, obviously, on the technical controls and the scanning and the application security efforts that we're doing on the the downwind side of the problem, right? So, but we're going way back up left in the development cycle, and we're saying, okay, what is the root cause of a lot of these things happening, and how can we start addressing the problem on that side as well? Just because the far end controls can only cover so much. And
Right.
candidly, there's even some issues that software scanning tools are not going to find. They're only found by, or avoided, I should say, by engineers who understand the concepts of secure design and development, the things that we're trying to teach them and get them to embrace today.
Great point. And I think that kind of shifts to, where we want to move the conversation or focus the conversation more. And, at Secure Code Warrior, we take a certain orientation, and it's really about the glass is half full. There may be root causes, but there's also, root solutions. So the whole movement of shifting left is all about bringing things closer and closer to, when that work is created in the first place. Ultimately, developers, are the ones that are building those applications and coding those applications, and we see a real opportunity to think about this from the standpoint of secure developers are really the heroes within the business, and can be a significant part of how that organization not only de-risks and differentiates itself, but does more quickly and more confidently. And ultimately, if you do it at a lower cost, you're going to be, leading the market overall. So let's keep on that theme a little bit, as far as, if a piece of the root causes is that we're not building applications that have some of these concepts in place, and it's developers that are focused on it. I mean, the fact is that this isn't a new concept, and it's not that many organizations, including your own, Russ, haven't been trying to affect this, right? So whether it's, and some of the realities around it and observations are, a one size fits all is never really a good strategy. Maybe if you're the only car manufacturer, your offer of choices of color, including black, black, and black, might work for Henry Ford when he pioneered the industry, but it's not going to work for a long period of time. So when we think about the technical community within an organization, what's good for one group of people might not be good for another. And the approaches that we hear from customers, and the words that are used, right, is it's a passive experience. Our developers are complaining of being bored. It's a check the box, requirement, because it's focused on compliance, which isn't necessarily an outcome. It's just an event, right? So as you think about some of the techniques that we've been taking, you know, is it the student or the approach that needs to change, Russ?
Well, I think I've probably showed my hand pretty clearly already. I think it's definitely the approach. We've, I've been, sadly to say, I've kind of been party to some of these approaches in the past, where you figure if you beat people over the head long enough, they'll change. So beating people over the head with long video like CBT type training, or just a lot of theory, and it has not worked well. Um, we've had training that we've put out in past experiences. I won't, not speaking of current company, but that really, you know, taught this wide range of things that really didn't, these developers didn't care about, right? And it didn't speak to them in a language because it wasn't really referencing source code directly. It was just, again, talking about a lot of theory. Um, and we've made it mandatory, put them into classrooms, taking them out of their day jobs for one day at a time for a year, or we've negotiated down how many hours they would spend with their managers, which is another place that we had a lot of friction. Is we were coming in as the organization saying, thou shalt make all your developers do this training, and it wasn't really the way to go about getting people to embrace and actually uh, take on and use a different set of knowledge.
Yeah, that's interesting because, you know, if anything, I think that application security teams should be applauded for the efforts that they're trying to implore within their organizations and the change that they're trying to drive, because you really have two realities. One is you're trying to teach and help the organization understand something about a topic that they might not quite understand if it ties into, is it the new quality of the product, right? What's the relationship between security and me building a feature-rich application? And when you add on top of that, that it is something that has to be taught and has to be embraced and learned within an organization, that how many things has any company actually rolled out to teach their development organization in mass about how to do something, right? It's an organization, it's people that are very creative, very problem solving oriented, inquisitive, but they learn the principles and concepts in school. Maybe there's some good classes here or there along the way, but it's usually word of mouth or on their own or trial and error and on the job. And today, I think that's an interesting thing to focus on, right? Because if ultimately it's the approach that needs to change and it's not the students, then you really have to understand more about that student and what makes them thrive, and how are they oriented and what's most effective to teach them. And quite frankly, it's a hard thing to do because the industry hasn't necessarily nailed it either. When you ask a developer, how did you learn how to do the most interesting or meaningful things that they know how to do, their first answer is not going to be from this great course. It's the exceptional answer. I learned it by figuring it out. I learned it from a colleague of mine. I maybe learned it from my organization because we have this expertise and that's part of our secret sauce. And that's a hard thing to go scale when you have the thousands of developers, in an organization like yours that all speak different languages. But those languages are anywhere from, Java Enterprise to Node.js to Go, etc. And they're spread out across the world and working on lots of things that are hard for anyone to get their hands around, let alone a group that's outside of that trying to affect change. Russ, when you think about that, what elements do you look at, or where do you think that we can have the biggest impact on trying to help developers, close this gap overall? And
I think
what it really, I mean, what do companies, let me just continue the question because I know you've got, a framework to talk about, but, what do companies really need to do to succeed in delivering effective software security training within their organization?
so. There's a lot of different angles that you could approach that question from, and there's a handy slide here that I think we could reference. But setting all, I think a lot of these are kind of self-evident as far as how you engage people in general to want to bring something on. But I'll just, before I dig into these, I'll go into just the overall strategy, which I think is to get software engineers to believe that writing software securely is part of their trade craft, and that it's kind of an egregious thing that they weren't taught this in their very first Java course when they were in college. But the truth of it is that these things aren't taught even today. When I walk into rooms of brand new, college hires who've just come out of the most university, the top universities in the country, and I ask them, raise your hand if you talked about security in any of your courses. Very, very few of them will raise their hand. So getting, it's kind of this new thing that's like, hey, you mean I'm supposed to be doing something different? So how do we get the hook in? How do we get people to kind of accept this kind of new information? And I think it's about how we put the content in front of them, because if we just point them to a bunch of, of boring movies or videos or things like that, I don't think they're really going to engage. So, having good content, motivating them, getting their idea that, hey, I better pick up this skill because my peers are picking this skill up. And by the way, this isn't just a once and done thing. This is something that I can continue to go on and improve myself in, and really get them to understand that this is something that we're going to applaud their achieving, and something that we're going to really start measuring, and that we're going to recognize them for. And eventually, I think after you've gotten past this stage of getting some critical mass, you can make it to become an expectation. But I think it's just introducing this new concept to individuals who've been brought up and trained differently, and even some of the ones that have been out there for 20 years that have reached the place where we had back on the ostrich slide, where they have a lot of these jaded attitudes towards security. I think bringing it to them in a fresh and interesting and engaging way is really the key to getting them to pick this up and actually run with it.
And ultimately, we agree, and it's a reason why, we're business partners today, and we've got the fortunate opportunity to have come to know you and work closely with your team, because our whole approach is, or our philosophy is approach matters. Developers, the industry hasn't really created a good standard yet or precedence on creating an expectation, to your point, right? So software engineering has not yet matured to where mechanical engineering or other engineering disciplines are, where there's more standards and expectations that help create a structure to work within. But it's moving in that direction. But ultimately, if the developer is left and is ultimately part of your manufacturing process to go, create your digital products and entities that your customers, consume and interact with you through, then you have to come up with an approach that engages them in that. And we think, because of the fact that there is this chasm that exists in understanding of, is it really my role or not, and why are we doing this, that making it fun, making it engaging, and really trying to replicate to the best of your ability that experiential learning process, and really pick up on that theme overall, ultimately helps not just impart knowledge, which is a good starting point, but really build a skill. Because in the end of the day, success is when a developer writes a line of code that otherwise could be written incorrectly and create a potential vulnerability that could be exploited, and they don't, because they know that taking this technique will prevent that from happening, and that's how we code correctly in our organization or as an individual. So having an engaging approach that moves beyond checking the box, and from our standpoint, having the tools available to engage in different learning styles to keep secure coding top of mind, because it's not something you just learn and put away. Yeah, if you're not practicing it every day, you're forgetting it. So ultimately, it's about helping change that culture and change that behavior, and really providing a resource to your organization to help them all become better overall, which is a really nice transition to, taking a closer look, Russ, at what you've done at Capital One and kind of the program and journey you're on, because it's all about, taking that longer term approach and thinking about, how does tomorrow and next year and 5 years from now become a more and more confident and secure world within Capital One. So can we shift gears now and take a look at what that looks like within your organization?
Sure, happy to. So the CSSE is basically a internal certification that we've developed in Tech College that has as one of its I'll say one of the legs of the stool as far as the certification goes. We use the Secure Code Warrior product as kind of the anchor for the certification. The CSSE, that stands for Certified Secure Software Engineer. When I first came to Capital One a couple of years ago to build Tech College, one of the first conversations I had was with the CISO of the company, because I came in to basically lead cybersecurity training for the company. And I'm not speaking of the cyber training that, the annual thing, don't click this type training that you get, but we're talking about training for our cyber organization, which is sizable, and for our tech organization. In the skills that I was alluding to earlier, what are the things they need to do in their jobs when they're building out cloud structures, infrastructure, or building code, or both? What do they need to know? And when we sat down, I was like, well, we have this great new entity called Tech College. I'm going to have, the resources to start really focusing on this work. Where's the biggest bang for the buck here? And in a few minutes conversation, we both came to the software engineering organization, which obviously dwarfed even, the rest of the tech organization. I think we have more software engineers than most any other tech job in the company. So that was what started us down this road. And having just come from, a number of years at a different company, trying to build and take different approaches, some of that we were bashing on a slide a couple slides back, to get software engineers to take this, get this idea of learning how to code securely, I wanted to look for a fresh start and a fresh approach, and maybe something that we could use to impart this knowledge in a better and more effective way. And so in that research, I came across Secure Code Warrior, which was just starting out, and had some conversations, and here we are. But we decided that we needed to go even further than that, because having a cool tool, it has a lot of the functionality and features and capabilities that Code Warrior does, was a great starting point. But we knew if we just put it out there on its own, without having more of a backplane of a program around it and starting to build a bit of a culture around it, that it might be cool for a while, but it may indeed fade over time in people's interests. So we decided to build a certification. And basically what that meant was we would have a model that would have an entry level and then additional tiers that we'll look at in a second here, that would use tools like Secure Code Warrior and other methods that we're using to use actual source code for people to review, do code reviews, and actually look at the stuff they're working with every day, instead of just listening to a talking head theorize about why you should parameterize your queries and things like that. We wanted to make sure that this training included both industry knowledge and things that were specific to our own organization, as far as processes and practices that we did in securing code. And we wanted to make sure that this wasn't a once and done thing. We wanted to make sure we build it in a multi-tiered fashion and have some other things that we're doing to make sure that it's encouraging people to kind of stay engaged, so they keep that knowledge fresh, as Steve was alluding to a moment ago. So we have it in 3 tiers. Basically, we have the associate. We kind of stole shamelessly from the Amazon Web Services tiering, but that's okay. I don't think they mind. It seemed appropriate. So in any case, we have an associate certification, which is basically entry level. It's really just focuses on the OWASP top 10 and getting people, getting developers within their particulars. There's a number of different coding languages they can pick, but within a specific language, getting them proficient at recognizing patterns or anti-patterns, as you will, of bad code, and then figuring out what to fix them. And obviously, a lot of that is facilitated through Code Warrior. So that's really the first tier. The second tier, we want to make it a little bit harder, so we're presenting them with more difficult problems in Code Warrior and a deeper assessment. But then we're also teaching them, and then testing them on areas around secure design from the OAuth standpoint, and some of the AppSec features and processes that we have at the company. And then those really are the first two tiers that we have out and in production. We're now working on our third, our specialty tier, which will probably continue to evolve over the next year, or beyond, I'm sure, where these are the people that you may want to refer to eventually as security champions in your company, or the individuals who are going and differentiating themselves or moving into a specific, especially like threat modeling, for example, which seems to be experiencing a renaissance right now, or people that specialize in leveraging and interpreting static and dynamic analysis tools, so those types of things. And it's just really where the imagination takes us as far as where people could specialize to have key roles within our software organization.
Yeah, and one of the things that I've observed, Russ, which I get the opportunity to talk to many of your peers in the financial services industry, as well as lots of others across technology, telecom, healthcare, airline industries, and I think ultimately what you're laying out here, right, is really leading edge and industry leading as it relates to the topic of how do I start to institutionalize and build a program where I can start to raise the tide and expectations and skills of a very important part of our organization, to complement others that other ways that you're doing that with the broader organization. And then start to look at specialization above and beyond that, because we see sometimes organizations not really knowing where to start, and they start in immediately thinking about the speciality. But the reality is that you've got, whether you have hundreds of developers or thousands of developers, if you can positively start to change the culture and behavior and achieve, whether you have the actual badge or not, but moving people to achieve that associate level know-how, that all of a sudden you're really arming your development team to start to avoid making the mistakes that are part of that flat line, which is really a best case scenario in many companies. And that actually becomes a decreasing trend line over time, which is ultimately where companies get more secure and start to do more and more quickly, more confidently. So I congratulate you and your team on the forward-looking approach that you're taking.
Thanks, I appreciate that, and you guys have been great partners along the way, I should say. I think the last piece I really want to key in on here is incentive and recognition, and this kind of ties back to a couple slides back. Is how are we making this? How are we treating this differently from the ways we did training before? And everybody thinks when they go into, they're going to go spend their time on something, it's going to be what's in it for me, right? What do I get out of this, whether it's something tangible or intangible? And we really wanted the developers to see a benefit here for what they were doing and embrace it, as opposed to just feel like they were being compelled to go have something basically crammed down their throat that they didn't care about, nor they didn't have, nor they really have time to deal with. So as it is, we made sure that this program was not mandatory. We're not, people are not being voluntold to do this. We're certainly promoting it among their leadership and having them talk about it, but where it's nobody is being compelled to do this, and we felt that was really important. That may maybe that'll change down the road when this becomes part of the culture, but we wanted this to be embraced as something that people wanted to do instead of something that they felt like they had to do. And we're really recognizing people for that, for taking that step. And we have an internal web page where they can go as soon as they get certified. They can go click on that web page. They can see their name up there. They can go over and they can generate this. You see this certificate over to the right. That certificate has some rather important signatures on it. It has the CISO of the company, who is senior vice president, very important person in the company, and we also have the signature of another senior vice president who runs all of what we call our engineering excellence program. So the entire very visible people in the organization have endorsed this, which I think is important for them. We've also built out you can see the little stones. So those are actual stickers that they can get and put on their laptops, and they represent different levels of certification. We have T-shirts. I was hoping I could find a quick picture of one for the slides, but didn't get it in time. I apologize for that. But we have some really cool T-shirts that were built by our design team that align to the certification, or I should say represent that. We're also holding tournaments. Obviously, I think everyone knows or should know that the Code Warrior platform has a way to hold tournaments, and we're taking advantage of that. And we're putting out some pretty cool prizes out there, and making things like invitational only tournaments. Like you can't be in this tournament unless you actually have achieved the first level of your CSSE, or maybe even one for those who have gone and gotten the second tier certification of the professional level, and making it harder. Making these things that people feel like they have to work to attain. And really, I guess the other side is maybe a little bit more coercive, but we're not, I should say this, we're communicating pretty clearly that, doing these things are certainly ways to differentiate yourself from your peers. So obviously that's going to get a lot more people, jumping on the bandwagon.
Yeah, Russ, when you think about that, right, it's my commercial instincts were going to go react to something you said earlier, but when you really digest this slide, right, different companies have different cultures, right? Many describe, that they rather have a carrot incentive than have to use a stick, but there are some organizations that take direction better than others, and that's how you get things done. But when you talk about this being voluntary, the piece that makes it increasingly successful and why it will scale is because you've invested in the incentives and recognition. And this is something that when individuals achieve it, it's a badge of honor. And it's a badge of honor that's recognized at the highest levels of your organization. And that becomes a really important driver, right? So sometimes things that are mandatory become a baseline expectation and gets built into to the goals. Maybe some organizations aren't ready yet to put a measurement on that outside of time or maybe content, so that you're refreshing your knowledge and skill of the OWASP top 10 on a frequent basis. But ultimately, the incentives and recognitions, which we're seeing more and more in every facet of our personal lives and professional lives, that you can earn a badge for doing anything. But it's not a badge like our children have been succumbed to, that just by participating, but by doing things that ultimately are moving towards achieving that desired outcome. And in your regards, I think the leverage that you have is not just the investment that the organization has made in Tech College and your particular cyber organization or within that, or discipline within that, but the recognitions that if you achieve this, it is noteworthy and it is recognized, and that's pulling others along into that process overall.
Yep, totally. And
So
I
a lot
think
of the questions that we get, Russ, is, so how do you measure success? And how do you know when you're being successful? So for you to get this program off the ground, and as you think about that from a metrics and tracking standpoint, where are you today, and kind of how do you see that evolving as you continue to move forward?
again, a great question, and this is something that we've been thinking about really from day one. And I think our most important metric, at least for this first year, we're not even a year into this effort yet. Really more about like 6 months or so, candidly. Um, the we're really just concerned about, are people actually embracing this and taking the training and going for the certifications, and is it getting traction among the development organizations using this kind of passive method that we're using. And um, I can say, give it a pretty much a resounding yes. And there's an interesting phenomenon that's starting to happen that I think really gives testament to that, which is this was a kind of online, do it all on your own type training that people would go study for a few days and work in the training ground, and then they would go take their test. We've had more recently some requests like, hey, can you come out and do a quick prep class for us to help us get ready for this? Kind of, some people would call it hand holding, but others just like the ability to go away and sit in a room and focus on this with some peers, and they seem to learn better that way. But in any case, so we agreed to do one of these type training sessions, and it was pretty successful. So we put a few others out there, and they filled up in like 25 minutes. And so suddenly we had like, well, we have more demand than we have people. So we put out to some of the people who had gotten a professional certification, hey, do you have any interest here? And we've had an overwhelming response of people who have gone and gotten their certification that want to come back and teach and basically proctor or teach the class to help others get the certification. So it's really is starting to grow there, and we're getting more and more people calling us in and saying, hey, we'd like to teach this to our organization. Can you either have an instructor, or can one of our people go and do it? So the fact that that's starting to happen is really, I think, a testament that we're getting that uptake that we're hoping for. The second side of this is the effectiveness parameter, and that's basically, I consider that a much, much longer putt, and actually is probably a couple runs down a couple four-ways or fairways, that is. But that really speaks to trends organizationally that we're going to have to look at over time. Obviously, we, like most organizations, we collect data, we do scans, we look at numbers of vulnerabilities. We've had some early conversations with our cyber organization about doing those types of correlations, but I think we're not embedded enough across the entire software engineering organization to really even start that kind of an experiment. And also it's always going to be somewhat suspect, because you're going to be using questionable baselines many times, and software engineers move around a lot. But we're hoping that over time we're going to be able to see and demonstrate. Well, I think we're going to know it's happening, but we'll be able to demonstrate that we're seeing a downward trend, at least in the most common vulnerabilities that we're seeing.
Right, which really reinforces your whole philosophy, and it's back with lots of experience, that this is not an event you're driving towards. This is a process, and that process has, there's indicators down the road that that you're gaining on it. And ultimately, as I listen to you and I think about what you've architected that works for your organization, is you're ultimately lighting some of those fires, those pilot fires, and at a certain point, they're gonna converge and start to really take effect and grow, very fast and quickly across the organization in a positive way. So I congratulate you for taking the measured approach along the way. Maybe the last point to touch on, Russ, before we summarize here. In the context of this slide, which I know is a little bit outdated, can you talk a little bit about what you've observed as you've rolled this program out, as it relates to maybe what you didn't observe in the more traditional approaches of CBTs and e-learning type of programs that you've rolled out?
Yeah, this is funny. I keep this kind of as a souvenir slide. This is, I think, the very first week that we launched our program. We'd had the product in house for a while, but this is the first week, I think, that we launched our kind of certification and all that. And I just looked at these numbers. They're not astronomical by any stretch, but what I was thinking about is, in the past, we've had engineers, that they grumbled about taking, 30 minutes worth of training in secure coding, and that they didn't have time for it. And here we have people that, are averaging a couple average hour, couple hours per user, a lot of hours played overall, a lot of challenges played by each user, and none of this was happening when they were sitting there going through slides. They were probably multitasking, maybe taking a few screenshots so they could do the test at the end, and then going back to YouTube and forgetting about it. So I just thought that this was great. And one of the other comments that we got that I'll just throw in kind of as in closing is that more than one of the software engineers has come to us and said, I multitask through most of the corporate training that I do here. They said, there's no way in the world that you can multitask through this training. You have to pay attention, you have to stay engaged, and in order to be able to pass the assessment at the end, which I thought was really pretty cool too. So
Yeah, I've heard one prospect say there's new learnings at every step of the way, that challenges you to think. And when I knowing our product, as well as I do, when I look at that, 60 averages challenges played per active user, that even if that's over a little bit longer time period, what that really means is, one customer said it really neatly. He says, I have the opportunity to experience, or look at maybe one vulnerability a month, because that's, what maybe is found in my code, and someone's coming back and sitting side by side with me and teaching me about that one vulnerability. He said, with your platform, I've got the opportunity to see dozens and dozens and dozens of vulnerabilities in the context of real code in my particular, language and framework, to accelerate that learning. So that whole experiential learning process, without having to always be the one making the mistake yourself, but challenge you to think and make decisions and learn from those decisions along the way. So appreciate you sharing that. So
sure.
That's my timer telling me, Russ, that we're almost up on time. So let's take a look at some of the key takeaways here, because I think this has been a really, really interesting conversation along the way. I mean, one of the things that I net out is, a one-size-fits-all approach doesn't really work well for security training, especially if developers are part of your target audience. And we see companies struggling with that, knowing that they have to achieve regulatory compliance and they have to roll something out, and wanting to do something that is as straightforward and common as they can, which is natural, right? Especially if you have scarce resources. What I think you've learned, and what we're seeing in the industry, is that approach does matter. Developers are very different than other individuals in different departments, or even across your broader technology organization, and they learn in a specific and certain way. And if you can lean into that and really focus on your approach, and is that approach aligned with helping that individual or that organization move from reaction or a break fix to really a prevention, which means that I've got to move beyond just knowledge and information and really build a habit or a skill, that you'll start to realize some of the the positive effects of what that will mean from an overall quality standpoint, what that will mean from an overall output and timeliness of output. That security actually speeds you up, doesn't slow you down, which is, I think, is a misnomer today, and really help you build an approach that starts left, is prevention oriented, and builds a positive culture around security, where developers know it's as important as anybody within the organization. And if you can achieve that, and ultimately you kind of have to achieve that if you're ever going to move beyond the best case scenario of flatlining and continuing to recreate the issues of the past, but at least being able to keep it constant, and really move the organization forward. Which if the financial services industry is going through this digital transformation, than those that can do that not only the quickest, but the most effectively because of the added risks and realities of the data and the systems and the role that you play within the industry. Those are going to be the true winners in the end. And we think that there's ways that can really help approach that. So ultimately, our advice is, make your developers the secure coding heroes within your organization. Start with a security mindset and find that approach. If we can be from help, to help to your organization, we'd be happy to do that. But ultimately, whether it's our approach or someone else's approach, just because somebody knows how to break something doesn't mean, or even that someone knows how to fix it, doesn't mean that they know how to prevent that in the first place. And just keep pushing to find the approach that helps you get to that prevention, because there's not enough people that will ever exist in the world to go react and detect and de-risk what's becoming more and more and more of just a digital reality of and world of tomorrow. So with that, I think, Russ, there isn't going to be any time for any additional questions. I know as I saw some questions pop up throughout the session that I was weaving those in and asking you those questions. For anyone that has asked questions that we weren't able to get to today, we apologize for that, but we assure you that we will follow up in writing and give you responses to all of those questions. And we will make this presentation available to those that would like to view it afterwards. But Russ, I really want to take this opportunity to personally thank you. I've really enjoyed the opportunity to work with you since we first met in a year and a half ago now. I really do think that Capital One is really leading the industry and helping set kind of some standards as far as where we need to get to. I don't think that organizations should be intimidated if they're not there yet. But one of the things that you and I have talked about in the thread that's come up and even some of the questions is, compliance is not an outcome. And if anything, achieving compliance doesn't necessarily mean that you're any better or worse. It just means that you've achieved compliance, and that ultimately those regulations and compliance checks are really in place to say, are you continually improving and making the investments to make tomorrow a safer and better or world as it relates to securing your organizations. And let's start focusing on the people side of this. Maybe for some of you, this is an eye opener and you haven't heard about us or, approaches like this, and it gives you hope that there are ways available, there are solutions today that can help move that needle forward and really help make, tomorrow a safer reality than we are today. So Russ, thank you, thank you for your time here, your insights and experiences, and we look forward to continue to work with you on a going forward basis.
My pleasure, Steve. Glad I could be here.
All right, everyone have a great day today, and thank you for listening in.